Hello everyone, welcome back to day 6 of the Stitch Together project. I hope you've all had a really lovely weekend. Thanks so much again for joining me on this project, and keep the embroideries coming. It's so lovely to see your finished pieces coming in, but also your works in progress and all your questions as well. So thanks so much for that. I'm getting really inspired actually, so it's really great. So today we're going to be looking at French knots and beads. So I'll show you those in a second. I have uploaded the new sort of schedule for the week. So if you just look on the Facebook group page, and you should be able to see there what we're going to be getting up to this week. There is an option on Thursday for you to send in your requests. So you can ask for me to cover a specific stitch if you'd like. Providing that I know it, of course, but yeah, so just send in your requests. If you've got a burning desire to learn a certain stitch, then just send that in and I'll do the best I can to help you with that. So before we begin, once again, scissors and needles are sharp, so please sew responsibly. But I'll just get started. Okay, so hopefully you can see that all right. So today we're going to be covering French knots and beads. So I've actually got a little design here that I've done before, which has got both of those things in. So as you can see here, I've got this blackberry design, and in here we've got French knots and we've got beads. So you can see the ones that are shining are the beads, and the ones that are matte are the French knots. Now both of these techniques create the same effect, so I'm going to show you both. And obviously if you don't have any beads, that's fine. I just thought maybe some of you might have some beads somewhere kicking around. Maybe if you've got an old necklace or an old piece of jewellery, you could maybe cut that up if you're not wearing it, and have a go that way. But we'll start with French knots first, and I'm going to start my French knots in this pink section here. So I'm going to get my pink thread. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mix this thread. So I'm going to do pink and green, just so you can get an idea of what it looks like when you mix your colours and stitch French knots. So again, I'm going to use 3 strands of thread. I tend to use 3 strands of thread for everything that I'm doing, unless I'm trying to shade a design, and then I might go down to less, or when I'm stitching beads I will only use 2. So I've got 2 of the pink, and then I'm also going to get 1 of the green. So there's 1 like that. And then I'm going to group them together and tie a knot in the end like before. Pinch, push through the eye of the needle. Obviously you need to make sure that all your threads are the same length, so that when you tie a knot you've not got any long ends like I have there. So I'm just going to chop that off and put that to one side. Okay, so again with French knots you can start off in any way that you like. I mentioned the 3 little stitches. That's a good one to use if you know you're going to be covering a whole shape with French knots. You could weave through the back, or you could leave the knot on the back. But again, like I said before, your French knots, you're not going to be going down in the same hole as you bring your needle up in, but you will be quite close. So sometimes it's best not to have the knot on the back of your fabric. So what I'm going to do is just weave my thread through the back of these stitches here, just so that knot is out the way and it's not going to get in my way when I'm stitching. And as you can see, I've finished off my chain stitch lines, and I've done a bit more with the text. So I really like this effect with the chain stitch when you use it to fill in a shape, because it's quite textured, which I think looks quite nice. Just see if you can see that closer up. Okay, so you can draw on where you want every French knot to go if you want, but again, like with the seeding, sometimes it's better just to make it a bit random. If you're working on the PS I Love You, PS I Made This, not PS I Love You, These dots are already in place, so you can just do your French knots over these dots. But again, with the other designs, you can just add the French knots wherever you want. So you can maybe do them in the background if you wanted to kind of decorate the background of your design. Or again, you could use them to fill in a shape. So maybe another petal, or you can add another motif to these designs as well if you want to. Okay, so I'm going to place a French knot just in the centre for now, just so you can get an idea of what it looks like. So I'm going to bring my needle up where I want my knot to sit. Okay, now this technique can be a little bit fiddly, so it's good to leave your hoop on the table whilst you do this. Now first things first, I want you to lay the thread coming out of the fabric down towards you, so it's flat and straight like that. Next, I want you to take hold of your needle, make sure the tail isn't too long, and hold it with the sharp end pointing to the left. Now if you're left-handed, you can do this the other way around, but as I'm right-handed, I'm going to do it this way. So sharp end pointing to the left, and that piece of thread is pointing down. Next, I'm going to take hold of this piece of thread, and I'm going to wrap it around my needle 3 times. Now the more you wrap your thread around the needle, the bigger the knot will be. You'll find if you start to do it 4, 5 or 6 times, it actually might become quite hard to sew. So I recommend 2 or 3, and if you want a smaller knot, you could always use less strands of thread in your needle. So the trick with this stitch is to keep hold of this piece of thread. Next, I'm going to angle my needle into the fabric. Now as you can see, hopefully it's not going down in the same hole as I brought it up in, but it's just next to where I brought it up. If I brought my needle down in the same hole, I'd pull the knot all the way through to the back of the fabric, which is what I don't want. So I've just brought it down next to where I brought it up. Then with this piece of thread that I've got in my hand, I'm just going to ease that knot just to sit on the fabric. Okay? Again, keeping hold of this bit of thread, don't let go. And this is where it gets a bit fiddly. You might want to bring your hoop to the edge of your table to do this, or if you can, just lift it up like that. Grab hold of the needle, give it a wiggle, and pull it through until you need to let go of that piece of thread. And there you have it, French knot. Now, I don't know if you can see there, but you've got the 2 different colours. You've got the pink and the green. So it creates quite a nice effect. So I'll do another one again for you to see. I'll do one a bit further down. Hi Janet, nice to see you. Hi Amy. Okay, so thread laying down flat towards me. Needle pointing to the left. Wrap the thread around. I'll just do it twice this time so you can get an idea of the different size. Angle the needle into the fabric. Ease that so it sits on the fabric. Wiggle the needle, pull it through. You've got your second French knot. Now, like I said, the trick with this is to keep hold of that piece of thread. If you make that piece of thread loose, the likelihood is you'll get sort of a little loop on top of your knot. So for example, if I let go, see if this will work. No, it never works in the examples, but as you can see, that's not quite as flat as the other 2. Let's see if I can do that again. It's harder to make a mistake when you're trying. So if I just do it loose, again, that looks great. So that hasn't helped at all, but the trick is to keep hold of that piece of thread because you can get into a bit of a pickle. So keep hold of it, push it down, and you sometimes just have to wiggle your needle a little bit because you're holding it quite tight. So just wiggle your needle so that goes through and pull it until it's flat. So yeah, it's quite simple in theory, but obviously it takes a bit of practice to get going with it. Just have a go in a little area where you know you want to fill it with shapes, fill it with knots, and yeah, just enjoy and see if you like it. It's one of those love-hate ones. Some people love French knots, other people can't stand them. It's completely up to you. So I'm doing lots of knots with 2 strands of thread at this time. And maybe as I go further up, I'll do ones with 3 strands of thread. And as you can see, I'm just doing them randomly, so it doesn't really matter. And it's quite a good stitch actually to fill up a space quite densely with stitches. And it's quite nice because obviously they sit on top of the fabric, so it creates a nice bit of texture, and you can add a bit of a 3D element to your design. So that's quite nice really. Now I'm running out of thread, so obviously there's only so many knots you're going to be able to do with a short piece of thread. So when you've run out, get your needle once again, weave your thread through the back of your stitches, like so. Now lots of people say to me, the back of my design isn't very neat, or the back of my design doesn't look like the front. That's absolutely fine. I personally think it's a myth that your back should look like the front of your fabric. It's kind of impossible when you've got stitches like the French knots where you're jumping from place to place. You're not doing a knot on the back of your fabric, so it's not going to look the same. So I just say to people, just as long as you keep it neat, as long as you've not got loose threads all over the place, it's not a problem. When you do start to have loose threads, that's when you catch them, and that's when you get into a bit of a mess. But something like this, where your stitches are flat and where the ends of your thread have been woven through, that's perfect. It's ideal for what we're working on, so please don't worry about whether it looks messy. There is a technique called both sides alike, which is purposely created to create embroideries that are exactly the same on the front and the back. So if you're doing that technique, obviously you'd want that look, but we are not doing that technique, so we don't need to worry. So I'm going to do a couple more French knots just for you to see, and then I'm going to move on to beads. So again, I've gone with 2 strands of pink and 1 strand of green, and that's just to give a little bit of hint of the green. Obviously this is my pink section, so I want the main colour to be pink, and then just a hint of the green adds a bit of excitement. Okie dokie. So I cut that long end of the thread away. Still got my knot. Weave the knot through the back. And when you're weaving, you just need to make sure that that thread is secure and it's not going to pull out as you do your stitches. So just give it a little bit of a tug, and you can usually see. Okay, so I'll try to do this one closer to camera for you to see. So bring my needle up. Well, that's not going to work because I need it on the table. All right, needle pointing to the left. 1, 2, 3. Okay, angle it down. See, you can see there that I've made sure that knot is sitting on the fabric before I bring my needle all the way through. Okay, give it a bit of a wiggle. And there we are. So hopefully that makes sense. It will take a little bit of going to get used to it. Janet says, how far should you carry your thread on the back if you're doing a different section in the same colour? That's a great question. I was always taught not to go too far, not because it's a problem with how much thread you've got, but it's because it can be a problem if you're going to be displaying your work. I don't know if you can see that. But your thread, if you're using a thin fabric, will create a bit of a shadow. Is that coming up? Under your work. So if you've got densely stitched sections over here, and then another one over here, and you bring your thread from the back, from here to here, you'll have a shadow going across the back of your design, which obviously you probably don't want in your design. So the trick is to only keep your kind of jumping distance to a minimum. So anything you don't want to bring up in a shadow, I just finish your thread on one section, get a new piece of thread and move to the other. However, if I was working on something like this, where I know that all of the sections are going to be covered, I wouldn't have a problem stitching here and then jumping to here. Obviously, if you're going to run out of thread by doing that, it might be better just to finish your stitches and then start a new piece of thread. You don't really want to jump and then find out you can only do one stitch because you've not got enough. So I hope that helped. So I'm going to finish this piece of thread and show you how to do not French knots, show you how to do beads. So again, just weaving through the back. Get that away. Now I've got a massive selection of beads here, as you can see, lots of different colours, and most of these have come from old bits of jewellery, things I've been given. So just have a look. If you've not got any beads, you don't have to use beads. It creates the same effect as the French knots. So just have a look to see what you've got. The trick with beads, obviously, is to make sure you find a bead that fits onto your needle. So I'm going to use my number 7 needle. And you'd find that actually quite a lot of beads are a bit irregular. So some of them might fit and some of them might not. So it's just a bit of trial and error, really. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get 2 strands of pink thread to begin with. And usually I'd use machine thread for this. So if you've got any machine thread, use 2 strands of machine thread. Machine thread, that's quite hard to say. But obviously if you've not got machine thread, it's not a real problem. The reason I use machine thread a lot is because it's that bit stronger and it comes on reels like this. I've mentioned before about beeswax. So this is beeswax. And sometimes when I want to strengthen my thread, I wax it with beeswax. And that basically just means I run the thread across the beeswax. And that just gives it an extra level of strength. But if you're only stitching 1 or 2 beads on, you're not going really heavy with the beads, then it's completely fine to use cotton thread. If you're doing a really heavy design, then maybe do use machine thread. But for this, I'll just use the cotton. It's all about the strength of the beads, basically, because as you're bringing your thread through the beads, you're wearing that thread away. So the more you do it with the cotton thread, the quicker it will wear away, whereas the machine thread doesn't wear away as quick. So 2 strands, weave it through the back, just so that's secure. And I think I will go with the blue just to create a bit of contrast. Now it's good to have a little pot to hand where you can put all your beads, just so you can find the perfect one. I'm just going to put them on the edge there. So I think I'm going to use this one and this one because they look like they will fit through my needle. That one. And I'm going to put the rest back. Now, stitching beads is really, really simple. You probably already know how to do it, but I'll show you anyway. So what we're going to do is bring our thread up through the back of the fabric where we want one of the beads to sit. Now we're going to stitch them all on individually. Let's just see if this fits on the needle. Yep, that's fine. So thread your needle with the bead and make sure you bring your bead all the way to the fabric so it sits on the fabric. Next you want to stitch over the bead, so over the edge, not too far because you don't want a loose bead, but not too small because otherwise it won't sit straight on the fabric. Pull your thread through and as you can see that's sitting upright on the fabric. And if you find that it's actually wobbling a bit, it's not very secure, just bring your needle up on the other side, pull your thread through, thread that needle through the bead and stitch it down one more time. And now that bead should be extra secure so it's not going anywhere. Now I've obviously used a contrasting colour, but you might want to use the same colour as the bead so you don't notice the stitching, or you might want to use an opposite colour so you do. Again, that's up to you. So stitch over the bead, and you can make your beads sit in different directions. So obviously that's going vertically. If I pull this one, it's going off to an angle, as you can see. So it's quite a nice effect to do, to sort of just scatter the beads, a bit like the seeding, just scatter them around. There is a technique called tambour beading where you can stitch lots of beads on all at once, but you need a tambour hook and some sheer fabric to begin that. So that's a whole nother technique, but just in case you're interested, that's how they do it in fashion a lot of the time. They have lots of beads on one long piece of thread and they just use a hook to catch the thread underneath. Okay, so now I think I'm going to fill this shape with beads and French knots, but I'll leave it like that for now. Hopefully that's been helpful. And tomorrow I think we're learning about whipped back stitch and whipped running stitch, I think I've put on there. So I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. I hope that's helped. And again, if you've got any questions, feel free to just send them my way. And yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.